on childhood and youth in Ireland from 1740. We were just chatting earlier on and saying 12 years. It's the first time, like we've often revisited archaeology and revisited other subjects, but this is the first time that we've actually touched on the subject of children and our youth. And for that, I hope you find it very, very interesting. And Sarah Anne is attached to UCG, and she is a Cork lady.
Does that help me? Thanks, Mary. And I'm delighted to be here. I was meant to be here last year, but our teaching schedules, we didn't get them in time, so I was teaching till 7 o'clock on Tuesday and then again the next morning. So I've managed to bunk out on a class tomorrow. So if you don't tell anyone, then I won't. So I'm very much going to talk off the PowerPoint, and I'm going to try and woo ye over to the history of childhood and youth, which, like Mary says, is a new way of looking at Irish history in some ways. So first I'm going to talk to you about who I am, and then I'm going to try and persuade you that studying children and younger people can tell us a lot, not only about their lives, but actually about the history of modern Ireland. So if you look at modern Ireland through the lens of childhood and youth, that we're going to get some new perspectives. And then I'm going to really focus on family life, learning, working, playing, and unfortunately, if we do know anything about the history of childhood and youth, it's usually the unhappy childhoods. So we can think of some of the memoirs, we can think of the experience of children in Ireland's institutions, so the industrial schools, the mother and baby homes. That's a lot of where the historiography has been, and I'm going to try and expand that during the next 40 minutes. And then I'm going to talk about the NSPCC and finally childhood and youth during the Revolution. So to show that if we look at the Irish Revolution through that lens, we actually learn some new stuff as well. So who am I? I'm a lecturer in history, and my work has been on the history of child welfare. So I did a study of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. At present, I have an oral history project on the Tune Mother and Baby Home, which we just started off, and that's going to run for 3 years. And I also do a lot of work on women's history. So I'm the president of the Women's History Association of Ireland. So that's what I do. And tonight's talk is based on 2 chapters. One, there was 2 Cambridge histories. You might have heard of them. This was the social history, and the other was the Cambridge history of Ireland. So I was asked to do a chapter on children and the family for both of those. So that's really what tonight's talk is based on. And I've gone exactly as you said I would, Jane, the opposite way. So, before we get into Irish historiography, this is the big question when we're talking about history of childhood. And Thomas Beacon asked it in 1550. What is a child, or to be a child? And if I asked you today, when do you think childhood begins? And when do you think childhood ends? If you had to put an age on it. And then if I went further and I said, when do you think that children become teenagers or adolescents? And then I go further again and I say, what do you think childhood means today? And now you're wondering if you're in a history lecture, but you are. Because over time, all of these have changed. And I'd be interested in your answers at the end of the lecture, because mostly the age 7 is an age that is associated with the end of childhood up until the early modern period. Then we have the age 12. And then a big question is, does childhood end when you stop going to school and you start working? Or does childhood end when you have economic independence? So this is a lot of what we've had to do as historians of childhood. And then Harry Hendrick asks, can the history of childhood ever be more than that of what adults have done to children and how they conceptualize childhood? So if all our sources are written by adults, so if we're looking at children in education or in social care policy, in work, if it's adults writing about them, how do we get the voice of the child? So we're kind of obsessed with the voice of the child. The one thing we do know is that all of these factors affect what your childhood was like, or what a childhood was like historically. So we can pick 1800, 1850, 1900, and the social class you were from, your gender, your ethnicity was less relevant in Ireland until recent years, but your age, whether you lived in a city or you lived in a rural context, whether you had a disability, how your parents were, all of these factors affected the experience of childhood. And so it's hard for us sometimes to kind of get at this voice of children. And there's a few reasons, because even today, children don't really have a public voice. They can't vote, they don't have a political party, might be better than some we have, but they are usually seen in kind of negative areas. So we're looking at when they come into contact with the authorities. So a lot of what we try and do is find the voice and the experience of children outside of these. And then we have an issue with memory. So most people think that childhood was better when they were younger than it is today. Or they think that it was harder, or so our own memory of our childhood can affect when we're studying it as well. Okay, we'll get on to history soon. So what I want to do is, I was looking, I'm really, you know, the program that you run here is amazing, and I was looking at some of the collections that are there, and I was thinking, okay, if I'm going to look at these from the lens of history of childhood, and there's so many of the collections because children during the poor law is a really big area of research. So when you were in the workhouse, you were separated from your parents from the age of 2. If you were a boy, you were put on one side. If you were a girl, you were put on the other side. It really did affect the age you were, whether you would get any education. Then if we look at the school's folklore collection, what we can see is that childhood, those 10-year-old children that put together, those 100,000 children that put together that folklore collection, you know, they had quite a big impact in how we've collected Irish history. Another big area is sport, and the GA have their oral history archive, and that's a fascinating way to understand how important sport was over the past 100 years. So there's lots of ways that we can look at these collections. Then I also thought I would look at some of the National Library photos and see what ones were relevant to Tipperary, because I don't actually study Tipperary. So you're probably aware of this one, House in Templemore after a raid, but just that image of the child is quite evocative. I'm sure you're all aware of this one, the bleeding statues, and maybe we can talk about it in the questions, the history behind that. But what I found interesting is, on the website, this photograph is one of the top 20 photographs that's ever been viewed. So 100,000 plus views of this photograph of 3 children who were Mrs. Murdoch's 3 children. And the moderator said, I know for a fact this photo is a widely held favourite of the Flickr stream. Its title, Cuteness Alert, is also just perfect, and it was added to this album. So they were my look at Tipperary briefly. So then what we did when we were trying to establish what was childhood like, we had to start with family life. Okay, so we had to go to the 18th century, and we can see that by 1750, if you were in a middle or an upper class family, your kids had a childhood. So they played, they were educated, they had the type of childhood we might associate today. That's not the same if you're in the rural poor or you're working class. The biggest thing that comes through the records is this question of survival. So up until the Second World War, infant mortality, the number of children that survived in families was incredibly high in Ireland. It was higher in Ireland than internationally. So it's a big issue. And what we see in letters and discussion is this issue, they say, God's will. So a lot of correspondence after the death of a child will associate it to God's will, as a way, I suppose, to accept this issue in society. And when we do have these higher rates of survival, what we have, as we know, is a need to look after all these children. Ireland is really unique, and you've probably had a number of people in here talking about inheritance and immigration and all the issues. But for Ireland, being the non-inheriting sibling or child leaves very few options after the famine. So a lot of what has been written about it is, as we know, a reliance on immigration, and the fact that parents are really important in how a child's life and a younger person's life goes forward. So parents have real control in Ireland in a way you don't see as much in other countries. Another thing that historians have tried to talk about a lot is, did parents love their children in the 19th century? Did they love them in the 18th century? And it's a question that most agree, yes, they did, but there was also an economic reason why you had children and why you needed them to contribute. So they're kind of some of the big questions, and we know now that most children grew up on small farms or in small-scale businesses, and that it depended what gender you were, what you did in life. So family has a huge impact on a child's life, but it's only one aspect. And the next thing is obviously school, and how do you kind of look at how school has an impact on the life of a child. And as we know, before 1831, most children weren't educated. If you were Catholic and you went to a hedge school, yes, you had some education, or if you were Protestant and you went to one of the voluntary schools. And by 1821, only 26% of girls and 44% of boys were attending school in any way. And yet literacy is really high. So parents actually want their kids to be getting some education. They want to send them to school. And another issue, I suppose, with education, and it's one that always crosses over, when compulsory education is introduced in 1892, so when children up to the age of 12 have to go to school for 75 days a year, we have this clash between work and school. So you need the money at home, the family needs the wages from this child, and all of a sudden there's legislation to say, nope, they have to go to school now, they have to go for up to 75 days. So compulsory education has a big effect on children. And in 1926, this is raised to 14 years. In 1967, we get free secondary education. Each of these things has a big effect on Irish society. When you educate a greater proportion of people, it will have an effect down the line. The last one is obviously free third level education, which has again had a really big effect on what jobs people can do and broadened that kind of spectrum. Now I've put these two up because they're again from the National Library collection, but the Congested Districts Board, which you may have had someone in here, Ciara Brannock, has written a lot about it. This is the year that compulsory education comes in, so we do have a number of images from that year, but obviously the poverty of those that are attending, the fact that the boys are dressed similarly to the girls, it's obviously easier to make a skirt than it is to make trousers, the haircuts, and what they're learning in school. To just take that 1 year and look at education is really quite interesting. But the one thing that's happening is, if they're in school, they're not in work. And throughout the 19th century, the state is trying to bring in legislation to stop children working. So the Factory Acts are really important from the 1830s. The idea is that they should be in school. There's also an issue with the fact that children are cheaper than men are. So if you have children and women working in factories, their wages are lower, and it's not very desirable for families, especially when you want the father to be the breadwinner. So by 1878, they're regulating for all of these different factories, and they're even regulating for street trading. So you can't sell on the street. Newspaper boys become part of this, and other professions. And the kind of work they're doing, it may seem obvious, but most of the women and most of the girls are in domestic service. When we were going through the certificates for the Tune Mother and Baby Home, every mother that was in that home was written as working in domestic service, or the daughter of a labourer, which was quite interesting. It doesn't mean that that's true, but that's how they were recorded. So we have agricultural labourers. I'm going to talk a bit about the hiring fairs, but basically they had to work and they had to contribute. In urban areas, newsboys, chimney sweeps is probably one of the most dangerous professions. If you were an apprenticed chimney sweep, if you look at the court records in the 18th and 19th century, the deaths of chimney sweeps are really quite horrific. They did a number of inquests into big cases, and a part of it is that they're obviously very small, so they can do the work, they have small hands, they're 7, 8, 9 years old, but the person that they're apprenticed to is often fairly strict and is basically exploiting them. So this becomes a big scandal in the 18th and 19th century, the deaths of chimney sweeps. It's obvious enough, but young girls had to look after younger children, or little mammies as they were known in Dublin, and often they had to stay home and they wouldn't be able to go to school. Play is something that maybe seems not part of life for children before the 20th century, but archaeological digs have uncovered toys and even mass-produced toys from the 12th century. So if you had the money, the toys are not dissimilar to some of what we see today as well. The materials they're made from they were often metal or wood. When it came to children in Ireland, a lot of the memoirs and the letters that we've looked at, the one thing children loved to do was to imitate adults. So you see descriptions of giving Holy Communion, of making the dinner, of going out to work. So a lot of what they're doing with play is just repeating what adults are doing. When it came to the dolls, the National Museum of Ireland has a huge collection. We're trying to open a museum of childhood at the moment, and they have these beautiful dolls, handmade dolls often by fathers for their daughters, a lot of handmade toys from the 19th century up until the 1950s, and they just need somewhere to kind of display these. We also see that in wealthier homes like Elizabeth Bowen's, they're buying the toys from France, from the UK. There's actually like mass production of some of these toys in the 19th century. And the two things that come through in the 20th century is the cinema, obviously if you could afford it, but preparing food. Children are going out, they're collecting stuff. It's not dissimilar from what we see today, which is probably some of the most interesting thing. When it came to what they read, books and comics, the comics that you read at the beginning of the 20th century often showed your political, whether you were reading a British comic, whether you were reading Boy's Own, whether you were reading something produced by the nationalist movement. The comic book that a boy primarily read said a lot about maybe his parents' politics more than his. So that's kind of in the areas of play and work, and it might seem, some of it probably seems obvious enough, but this is a new area of research and we can't assume that children always played. We have to find the evidence, which is what we're doing. So the next thing I want to talk about briefly is the history of child welfare, which hasn't had for lots of good reasons, the best press in the media, and it's the area that I study myself. And there's usually 3 groups that provide care. If you were listening to the news today, Bernardo's announced that they didn't get enough funding this year and they're not going to be doing some of their advocacy work. Bernardo's is one of the organisations that came into Ireland late, but would have been founded in the 19th century. So it's from kind of this point that we're taking off. There's religious provision. There's also then, if you think of the Salvation Army, if you think of, it's not all Catholic groups, it's also Protestant and other groups. And when it comes to children and the state has slowly been getting involved in child protection since the beginning of the 18th century. So in 1703, the Dublin Workhouse for the first time accepts children from the ages of 5 to 16 years. But they have to be apprenticed to a Protestant master, and they have to be educated in the Protestant faith. And if we look at child protection in the 19th and 20th century, the big fight is over religion or proselytizing. So saving the souls of Catholic and Protestant children is a big concern. And all the legislation that comes in is really aware of this. So if we look at the reformatory schools and the industrial schools, one of the big things there was a Catholic child had to go to a Catholic industrial school, a Protestant child went to a Protestant industrial school. Later on, when it comes to adoption legislation, a Catholic child can only be adopted by Catholic parents. They didn't need to include the Protestant clause at this point. So religion is really important in all of this. You might have heard of the foundling hospitals. The London Foundling Hospital is a kind of really well known, but there were foundling hospitals in Ireland, and usually people in your reference point, it's that image of a child being left at the doorstep, and usually a mother left a little token. So in the Foundling Hospital, in the museum in London, they have all these tokens, like a little medal or something that the mother left when they were leaving. And unfortunately in Dublin, the infant mortality rate was huge. So 75% of those that went in there died in the first half of the 18th century. But it's really, the poor law is the first time that children get used to being in institutions. So from 1838, the idea of children being reared in institutions becomes more regular. And it's, you know, they're separated from their parents at the age of 2 years. There's a lot of concerns about whether they're getting any education. So a lot of the stuff that comes up there. And you're probably sick of this because of the commemorations, but a lot of the historiography about children and the state is a discussion of what we did in independent Ireland, what we did in the Irish Free State, and then in the Republic. Really the only document that did state that there would be some protection for childhood was the democratic programme. And to be honest, a lot of people didn't even, know that that was going to be introduced. So we have to look at how many people believed in that. But that quote, no child should suffer hunger or cold for lack of food, clothing or shelter, but that all should be provided with the means and facilities requisite for their proper education and training as citizens of a free and Gaelic Ireland. And a big issue with the institutions, and the True Mother and Baby Home is a good example of this. There's an idea that it is brought in purely because of independent Ireland. the Tuam Mother and Baby Home was the old workhouse in Tuam. It was an older institution. It was Glenamaddy workhouse before that. So how institutions change is quite interesting to me anyway. So in 1925, the poor law is supposedly abolished, although, as anyone, I'm not sure where the closest county home was to here, but the county homes still survive, and people in poverty still use the county home as some relief. The School Attendance Act in 1926, one of the problems with it is that if a child doesn't go to school until they're 14, their parents receive warnings, and over 120,000 parents were prosecuted for not sending their child to school. So a number of people that spent time in industrial schools was because of school non-attendance. And I know my grandfather was one of those in Letterfrack. The eldest of 14 in Dublin wasn't going to school, but someone had to contribute to the family income. The issue of illegitimate children, which we hear a lot about, perhaps, or unmarried mothers, they did try to deal with it. They said that if the parents get married, then the child will become legitimate. And similarly, they tried to pursue fathers, putative fathers, for maintenance, not very successfully. And probably the Adoption Act is the one that we're going to hear a lot about the next few years. And you might have heard about the illegal adoptions in the media, but even after that act is introduced, thousands of children continue to be sent to the United States illegally for the next 20 years. After that, probably the most significant there is the introduction of Unmarried Mothers Allowance and the Child Care Act in 1991. And they're very important in the history of childhood because they allow parents often the money to keep their children. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the NSPCC, and then I'll end on youth and the revolution, which might be a bit more in the commemoration where we're at. So I studied the NSPCC. You probably know the ISPCC today, or Childline. Let me say, I'd never studied the Irish Society. I stopped in 1956 when they went from the National Society, which is under the British umbrella, to the Irish Society. But a large part of what the NSPCC do, and this is their first report in 1889, they say it differs in its aim from all other societies seeking the welfare of unhappy children in that, whilst others seek to house and provide for the wanderer, homeless, destitute, it seeks to punish those worthless parents who make children wanderers, homeless and destitute, and to render other provision than their home less necessary. So when the society is set up, it actually is set up with the intention of removing certain children from the home. The problem is over the years that most of the children are actually being investigated because of poverty. So they're not really dealing with the issue as to why they're there. And if we break down kind of what the society does up until I stopped looking at them, they end up, I guess, starting to help families later on. But for me, what's more interesting in the files is what they tell us about what life was like. So they're going into people's homes, they're recording what people ate, how much money people brought in, whether someone had insured a child, whether the child was legitimate, whether parents were married, whether both parents were Catholic. They record all these very personal details about families. And the committees that were on them, like Noel Brown's father was an NSPCC inspector. They're the first social workers, really. But these were some of the branches. But the details that they tell us, and I'm just going to show you one in particular, you can also see from the files how people are living and, you know, how much money people are bringing in a week, where they're getting their income from. This is quite interesting because Home assistance was 6 shillings a week, whereas, as many of you may know, the British Army pension was 20 shillings a week. So the different ways that families are surviving and their income, you can glean a lot of that from the files, which is quite interesting. They also show the amount of overcrowding there was in Ireland, the number of people that were living in one room in the 1930s, whole families living in one room. So most of these are in Dublin, but it's quite stark to see that in 1 year 2,000 are living in one room. And the descriptions tell us a lot about some of the poverty that people are living in. So this one, 10 persons, the parents and 8 children were found to be living in one room when the inspector called to see about a boy requiring orthopaedic treatment, recommended by the school medical officer. The living conditions were miserable. This 10-room, 3-storied house contained 10 different families, 1 to each room, a total of 41 human beings altogether. There was only 1 lavatory and 1 water tap in the backyard for the use of all of them. So what I found when I was going through the files is, it tells me more about poverty and the social history of Ireland nearly than it does about the NSPCC. It tells us, you know, how large proportion of the population were living. But they were also very involved in the industrial schools and in committing children to them, and that didn't really come out in the last 20 years in the different reports. So this is just from 1948. During the year, we have had to arrange for the placing of a large number of children in industrial schools, chiefly because their parents were unable to maintain them. The whole question of the treatment of deprived children in this country calls for investigation, such as it has received recently in England. Now, if you ever wanted to get something through, you usually said, such has just happened in England. So with child protection, they often refer to what's happening in Britain as a way to push stuff through. And one other thing that came through the files, which I think is quite interesting, is the number of men that left Ireland, often for work. This is going on from the 19th century, but the women and the families that they left behind. So often these women wrote to the NSPCC inspector because they hoped that the inspector could track the man in the UK, because they had branches over there. So the term is deserted wives. I've interviewed a number of the women. It became the Deserted Wives Allowance in 1970. They hate the name. Later there's also deserted husbands that receive an allowance. This is one case where the first 5 letters are really nice. He's writing and he's saying, I found a place to live. It's not great, but maybe if you send one of the boys over, you know, I would have a bit of company, and then when I get somewhere bigger, we can all move over. After a number of months of her getting no money, she does go to the inspector, or the cruelty man, and then this is what she gets back. Received your threat, which hasn't had any effect on me. As you know yourself, neither you nor the cruelty man can do anything to me. I have offered you a home here, and you have refused, thereby putting yourself in a position that favours me in not maintaining you. Better people than you have lived in one room. And when I found some of these cases, I started to follow up this situation, because I hadn't heard a lot about deserted wives, and I hadn't read a lot in the history. So I interviewed the first woman, Maura, who ever got a separation allowance, a Dublin woman, or a separation from her husband. And she said the first time that Sean left, he told her he was going to get the paper. So that, obviously he didn't come back for a number of months. He did return, and they moved to the UK, and she had another quite interesting story where, even though she didn't know her neighbours, the social worker was coming around, and they all knew that she had nothing. She didn't have the fire lighting, she had nothing in the presses, so they came around the back and they kind of put some stuff in the press, and they look after her basically. And she said she often wondered, she had never really spoken to them much, but that kind of sense of community. So these stories come through the files as well. I'm almost reluctant to depress us even more with the industrial school system, but just briefly, that is a big part of the history of childhood. Obviously, it might be a part of people's personal histories. This is Artane, this is Baltimore. We know a lot since the Ryan Report about the industrial school system. I don't know if you've heard of the Atlas of the Irish Revolution. Yeah, so you're like, yes, no, that sounds good. I was asked to do a piece on the institutions because the big thing about independent Ireland is all these institutions stay open. So we could only fit, we didn't put all the institutions up there because it would have just been ... So we put the industrial schools, we put the Magdalen laundries, we put the mother and baby homes that are part of the commission. We couldn't put all the county homes on. We definitely couldn't put all the psychiatric hospitals on. We couldn't put the Borstals. So we just kept it to what's in the key there. But already it's quite a spread of very large institutions. And in the 1950s, 1% of the population was in an institution in Ireland, which is quite a large figure. And Jim Smith called this Ireland's architecture of containment. So that's how he's described. So the last industrial school closes in 1984, the last Magdalen laundry in 1996, and obviously we still have a lot of other institutions. For the industrial schools, probably the big thing that I would argue is it wasn't the cheapest way to look after children in poverty. So it was 11 shillings a week in the 1930s was paid per child. Home assistance was only 6 shillings a week, so maybe supporting families might have been a better option. What we do know is that who your parents were and whether you were married or unmarried, these issues were important in whether your children were placed in there. We also know that Ireland isn't unique, and people don't really talk about this a lot, but there's been 20 reports into institutional abuse in 12 countries in the world. We usually hear a lot about Ireland. There's plenty of other countries that have undergone this. We're not unique. We're just, our situation was pretty severe, and we had a larger number of institutions. Okay, so I'll just do, I'm not sure if I'm keeping people, so I'll do 5 more minutes and then I'll see whether any of this has been relevant to your lives or not. So the last thing I wanted to end with was just childhood and youth during the Irish Revolution, because we've so much that's been digitised, we've so much been written about. You know, they started writing about the women from 2016 a lot more. We've heard about ordinary people and their involvement. Maybe you have relatives that were involved. But the one thing we know is that if you look at some of the brigades or the squads, they're younger men usually involved. Youth is a big part of the revolution in Ireland. If you go through the Bureau of Military History statements, either they will refer to Na Fianna Éireann or a similar youth group, or they'll discuss being politicised early on. So a big part of this history of the revolution is about younger people. And what we know so far is we have a few events that we know about during this 10 years. You probably know a bit about a good bit about the 1913 lockout, Na Fianna Éireann. I'll just run through them all quickly, but it gives you a sense that children are affected by what's going on, and they're not just affected by, you know, the tensions, they're actually participants. So one of the first things that happens when it comes to politicising children, in 1900, Queen Victoria is coming to visit, and they throw a party for children in Dublin. So they throw a children's party. They give them bags of sweets and buns. It's a good idea. 40,000 of them come out. And this, rightly or wrongly, this does enrage Maud Gonne and other nationalists. So they decide they're going to hold a similar children's event and party, but this time they're going to have, you know, Irish set dancing, they're going to have songs, ballads. It's going to be a lot more cultural that way. So the Patriotic Children's Treat is held on the 1st of July in Phoenix Park. And it's the first kind of real, other than the Gaelic League, the real politicisation of children. Another event where we see children really coming to the fore. After the tenement houses collapse in Church Street in 1913, the newspapers write about the ages of the children that die. And that's the first time they really start focusing on, you know, 7 years old, 12 years old. And when we look at the report afterwards on the Housing Committee, they discuss this question of children in the tenements. In the same year, the schoolboys strike, you've probably heard of this, but during the 1913 lockout, a number of groups of, particularly schoolboys, they wouldn't use the Eason's produce, they wouldn't engage with any of the employers, so they held their own strike. And I don't know if you were watching the climate change, the children's strike last Friday. Children have been striking in Ireland throughout the 20th century. So over school meals or not getting school meals, supporting their teachers. There's been strikes throughout the 20th century. And this is one of those. That's just an image of the Church Street disaster and the collapse of those tenements. The other way in which, just a few more images, Na Fianna Éireann, you probably know a good bit about them, but we're doing more and more research. There's more and more research now into the two girls groups. There's also more research into whether the young men that were involved in Na Fianna Éireann go on to join the IRA, the volunteers, whether they participate in the War of Independence. So we have to track some of these boys. So it's set up by Constance Markovich and Wilmer Hobson. And one of the main reasons it's set up is the Boy Scouts are set up in 1908 and they need to have a nationalist version. Girls are initially left in and it's from 8 to 18. They scrap that and they limit it to boys from 12 to 18. And they go far more down the lines of military training and a lot more about commitment to the cause. There is a girls group, the Girl Scouts, and they're set up in 1910. There is another group as well in Belfast, but the numbers are quite small. They're nothing to match Na Fianna Éireann. A big part of the movement, I guess, is about moulding the minds and bodies of youths. So getting them kind of doing different training, getting them into the nationalist movement, getting them into the networks, the social networks. A lot of them marry, we know this, that the relationships, the personal relationships that come out are quite important. They're encouraged as well to participate in the cultural revival, and they are encouraged to commit to the fact that they will make the ultimate sacrifice. So they will do that for the cause, for the revolution. 21 current or former members died, we know this, from 1919 to 22. There may be more that is found. And a lot of the individuals partake in 1916 and go on to be involved. I'm not going to go into Joe's book, but in fairness, he's doing a book now on the children that died in Northern Ireland in the conflict, so he's doing a similar type book at the moment. But it was really interesting. The youngest child that died was Christina Caffrey at 22 months. Okay, I'm actually going to leave it at that, but hopefully I leave it with this middle upper class childhood. But hopefully some of this is of interest, and yeah, I'll take any questions from the floor. Okay, thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think there will be lots of questions, but where will we start? Sarah Jane,
too much.
I think Marion looks as though, no, those Marion, I thought you were getting ready to ask something here. Anybody would like to kick off?
How many actually attended the Larkin Park to Margaret?
Oh, the same again. So the numbers are very similar. I think it's basically children just going to get a bag of sweets, which fair play, you know. Like if someone said there's going to be a party and there's going to be sweets and buns, then. But I do think that, you know, Maud Ban is also really involved in the provision of school meals. So in Britain, when the legislation comes in 1906, it's not passed in Ireland. And she basically, when she runs her own, she goes around with a cart and she has big pots of stew. And she was always talking about how it needed to be something nutritional. So it needed to be stew. It had to have meat and veg. And not, like later on in schools, it's milk and toast and jam. And she kept saying, no, it needs to be hearty and nutritious. She was very aware of that. But in 1914 it comes in, but it only comes in urban areas. And to be honest, school meals, the way that it's provided, it's like means tested, it's made to be kind of a lot of stigma around it. We never really have a moment, like right now we should probably have nutritious school meals, but maybe no one agrees with me, but when you look though, the argument against it is, and this is a quote in 1935, it would be too akin to socialism. So, and that was never loved, so. Yeah?
Yeah, and just in the 20th century and the tomb situation brings the mortality in the institutions in the Free State Republic.
Yeah.
Was it always pretty high, or?
The thing with Tuam and with Besbra, so Tuam 1 year there's 47%.
Yeah.
And the big issue that the Commission is looking at is, and Besbra has a year where it's 85%. Did all those children die or were they legally adopted? So that's so yes, there's death certificates for all of them. Will that be where, I can't say, I'm not on the Commission. I think, you know, a part of it will also be, some of it will be adoptions, but that will be really problematic because that is illegal. So that will be. But of more interest probably is the returns. So the local government know that there's a 47% rate.
Yes.
They get the report. They acknowledge the report. They acknowledge that that death rate is there and they don't act on it. So that's probably more the issue. So the infant mortality isn't something we know about in the last 10 years. They knew about it in the 1940s and the 1950s. It's just, did people care enough about these children? Probably. I don't know what people think about that, but that would be, if you have reports that people received and you acknowledge them, then that's a concern, I guess. Yeah.
Would there have been an awful lot of deaths pre-antibiotics anyway? And also, like if you had not just Tuam, but any institution where there's a number of people, I mean, if measles went into it or whooping cough or whatever, it would go rampant through the place.
Oh yeah, no, there's a photo, I don't have it there now, but there's a photograph of Baltimore Industrial School from 1913, and there's a line of 45 boys. At that, 2 months later, 20 of those had died because there was a measles outbreak.
Yes.
That's completely. And the issue with the homes will be though, there is vaccination by the 1940s or 50s. There is knowledge of hygiene and practices. So I don't know will that go as far. It shouldn't go as far as 50% anyway.
But there's an awful lot of families, like I think now my own mother, she lost 3 children, which was kind of normal at the time. You know, I'd say if you ask anyone of the same vintage, they all lost, families lost 1 or 2, or, you know, and it was kind of accepted as
God's will, that's what we see. Oh, my man was from a family of 10, which should be 13. You know, in survival rates, infant mortality is only tackled after the Second World War. There's still, but the thing is, it's so at odds with the infant mortality in the institution. So the figures of 12%, say, in Dublin City, but then you have 85% in Besbra don't. But we need to investigate if all those children are buried there and if they died there. We have death certificates for them, but did they all? That's the bit of this puzzle, if you want to call it that, we need more research on.
But would another factor be with regard to the high mortality rate in institutions as opposed to at home? You had more kids together, so set up get a bad dose of measles or get a bad dose of whatever material. Well, I mean, that's going to fly far faster through an institution with kids in the same dormitory beside each other or whatever, or living that closely together, then even though families were large, there isn't still any comparison.
Yeah, now I've looked at the death certificates for 2 and it's not measles. There's 2 years where there's measles. It's gastroenteritis, which that's not being fed properly. That's not, you know, neglect is a part of some of this. But that's...
Sorry, can I just, what are you saying about gastroenteritis if it's due to neglect?
I think that some of the deaths will be due to neglect. I do, from looking at the records and looking at the minute books and talking to survivors who lived in there, who have experiences of whether they were fed regularly, whether they were, you know.
Sarah, can I just say that people or children that went to the industrial schools, they were impoverished anyway, and they haven't the same resistance or the same strength of body to fight diseases. So, I mean, they were starting from a low base in any case.
That's true.
I will agree to disagree on it. I think with the industrial schools, we have archival evidence of the diet that is being provided, and it is not sufficient. And they know that it's not sufficient. So you can build up a child in a few months. If a child is malnourished early on, it doesn't mean that they will, for the rest of their lives, you can build up a child's immune system. If the issue is that how Irish society deals with the past of these institutions, that's obviously a big question. Why I pointed out that there's 10 other countries is to acknowledge that we're not unique, which I feel like when the reporting is occurring, it is very much that we're the only country. And like I work with scholars in Australia, Canada. To be honest, it's all Western countries. The minute that there's more resources in third world countries, there'll be more reports. It's just that, you know, Western countries have afforded the reports. So this isn't unique to Ireland. How we deal with it as a country or as, you know, a society, I think we probably should listen as much as we can to survivors who live there personally, but that's up for debate.
Yes. There was no proper oversight within whatever we think of people today, they exist. There was no proper oversight.
But there was an
inspector. There was a point that the church would say state collusion as well.
Yeah.
But getting back to the tenants in Dublin then, when you think of the abject poverty of the slums in Dublin.
Yeah.
And I mean, with the research into the high infant mortality rates, really those massive families in one room, no hygiene, the very same as we say over here, and there's a comparison there in a sense.
There is. Now, it never went above, like, here, Branagh has gone up. It didn't go above 12%. So, you know, there is a
stigma, I think, in relation to that, not only all those factors, as the lady said over, but there was huge stigma, and there was no respect for the child, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like they say, they were, there was shame attached to every child that came into those institutions. So it didn't matter really, if you know what I mean.
It didn't matter that they're in there. I suppose it mattered to them.
Oh
yeah, no, I know what you mean. I completely, like, I don't think that, I think from my research, most of the people that are being sent to the industrial schools are because of poverty or school non-attendance, which can be.
Having been pregnant at the age of 20.
But no one is in the industrial schools. And actually the Magdalen laundries, most of those women actually aren't unmarried mothers. So we have also blended all the institutions into, because we have lots of different institutions. The mother baby homes, lots of people wanted, there was a waiting list for the Vesborough one because it was private. They used to send the post from Cork to London and send it back to make sure that the postmark said London. So, you know, there was a secrecy being protected by families, and I think we understand that in the context of the time, why families were protecting that secret. Tuam is a public institution. It's a bit different to Vesborough. It should be, under the Registration of Maternity Homes Act, it should be yearly and quarterly inspected. And what the problem for me is, with all these institutions, for a number of years they did unannounced inspections in the industrial schools for 3 years, and the reports were so bad they switched back to informing the institutions when they were arriving. And that's not good oversight, I suppose we all would.
But would it be not true to say, I suppose I have an issue about this because I feel that while the religious have done their thing and nobody, you know, they're probably not to answer for. But I think that what's out there is rather it's not very balanced because, first of all, the state, the state needed to substitute or to provide the wherewithal. And the state didn't have any money.
Well, no, the state's paying for all of these.
Yes, but very little. Yeah, very little.
They pay 11 shillings a week per child. But it's a lot.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is that as a nation, we were extremely poor anyway. And the state, we haven't got the social setup that we have now, like where there's lavish money put into, thank you. But you see, it has to be seen, in my opinion, in the context of the time. And a lot of the judgment that is happening now is looking at it through the 2019.
I suppose all I'm trying to show is actually at the time a lot of people are against the system. So I can give you reports from, so most of my job is to look at the context. Where I would completely agree with you is I believe the religious orders have taken the brunt of the bad publicity.
Correct.
And the state has actually managed to evade a lot of that, but the state took the financial cost.
That's correct.
So the state has spent $1 billion so far, the religious orders have spent 250 million, but the religious orders have taken, in my mind, the brunt of the impact of it.
That's where I feel the injustice is. I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm
trying
to
I would agree with you on the public perception of this is why, like, I would often argue we need to put Ireland in the context of the international context, and then we need to, each commission is dealt with so when the Ryan Commission was set up, loads of scholars argued, include the county homes, include the mother and baby homes, get it all done at once. But because it's about cost, it all seems to get broken up. Yeah. So we've gone through, we would probably go through 30 years of inquiries. Because this started in 2009, so. For 1999.
Sarah,
Sorry.
can I just make a point? I'm sorry. See, I think, you know, there's a kind of groupthink attitude developing from reports coming out. And the groupthink attitudes are all in the negative. And like this kind of lady said, they're not balanced enough by stating what conditions of the time were towards the you know, their susceptibility to disease.
I should say there is one issue though. The religious orders will not let us access to the archives. So they won't allow us access to the archives. So that is problematic for us.
Sorry,
yeah.
That is the problem. The couple know prevarication, not getting straight answers when they're asked.
Well, it would just be good for me as a researcher if I could go in and look at the records they kept. So there has been privileged access for 1 to 2 scholars, okay? And they've been allowed to look at the records. I would like to go in and look at all the records, and then maybe that will, but for now we have court records which show us why children were sent. We have survivor testimony, we have reports from the time, we have newspaper articles. I've spoken to journalists from the 60s and 70s said they knew there was a story to break here, but their editors wouldn't allow them. So we have all of this. We're missing, lots of us have tried to interview members of the religious orders. In fairness, their solicitors will say to them, no, don't talk to them. The archives, we're not getting access to them. So we are doing what we can with the materials that are available, I guess.
Can I just make one more point? It's pertaining to what you've said about, you know, we weren't the only people, etc., etc. But it is only very recently that I came across a study of Australia and the fact that they had the same exportation of children to Australia as we had.
It was actually Bernardo that ran that.
Yeah, as we had it to the States. And people kind of, there was a big effort. It was quite a depressing book, but there was a fair effort in the 70s and the 80s to connect some of the children that had been exported to Australia with their English families and that. And there was a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
To that.
No, there's 10 countries at present where we have all these reports. What I will say is from interviews with survivors, they still have a lot of resistance to finding their biological parents, to finding their siblings. So we're still not treating survivors particularly well, unfortunately. So I have an issue with that, because in Australia they have. So like what we want the archive to look like online, the Tuam Home Archive there's a project called the Forgotten Australians, and it's 200 life stories, but then it's all the archival evidence with it, digitised, all available. So we're hoping to have this open archive for people to do research, basically.
But on that, can I say, the Australians are very, very good with all their archives. I mean, their military archives are superb.
They give access earlier and they digitise. They do much sooner.
Have you ever heard of Bird's Nest?
Yes. Yes.
Do you know about the history? Could you enlighten us about that?
At the moment, actually, with the Bird's Nest and the Smiley Homes, I'm actually doing a bit of a project on the Protestant homes in Dublin. So we got access to, this is very depressing, we got access to Undertaker Records, a private collection, which has led us to see far more homes than we knew. So we knew the Bird's Nest and it's connected with the Irish Church Missions, and the Smiley Home is connected with the Irish Church Missions. But we have actually...
There's many of the Bird's Nests around the country. I think there's new one.
Northern Ireland, there's definitely 2, but there's more, I think. So we're actually literally finding new homes. And so the Bethany home, and I suppose it's to say they're not all Catholic homes, which we never said as scholars. The Bethany home is Protestant, West Bank Orphanage, the Smiley homes, you might have heard with the Bird's Nest is another.
Well, I think the Bird's Nest were used, what happened was all the soldiers, all the Irish soldiers in the British Army, when they were lost, when soldiers were lost then, you know, they looked up the families and then they took the children from the families, just left, if they had 5 or 6, they leave 1 or 2 and the others would did it where it's that, you know.
Yeah.
But within a very young age then, like, you know, and they stayed there till they were 12, 14, 15.
Well, for what it's worth, I've talked to a lot of survivors in the Bethany home and they were treated just as badly as the other institutions. And maybe it's a question of, the regulation, inspection. We do have legislation there. Legislation doesn't always mean follow through. Like the 1934 Registration of Maternity Homes Act covered all public and private institutions. That should have been enough for, you had to go and inspect them. And Alice Lister, who's the inspector of the industrial schools in the 30s, writes a lot about how bad the conditions are. And we haven't even got into fostering and boarding out, which is going to be a whole other area, and I have a PhD student. But
would you know anything about children going off to England?
To work or to institutions?
Being brought up, young children being brought up. I saw them like when I was a child. I saw them. They used to go, and they had there was 2 ladies mind them like nurses with eggs and carrots and that. And every child had a little bag, a little sachet, you know. And usually about 8 or 10. Yeah. They used to get mail.
And regularly.
Yeah, well, I saw it a few times.
Okay.
You know, but I didn't know. We didn't know exactly what it was.
I think that.
I thought they came from. I thought they came from the same place, from the nursery, or from the.
It's probably coming from one of those smaller homes. Like I have a map. I didn't put it up, but I have a map of Dublin with the 20 homes we've found so far. Some of them are informal. So say I'm Mary and I set up like a home, and this is the issue with when disease does come in and that. So the reason we know about these homes is actually because we can see the children going to the undertaker from there, but they're not doing inquests, they're not going to the coroner's court, which is problematic because they should have gone to the coroner's court. So half of this is need, as you say, people needed, like whether, I'm sure you may not agree with me, but until we get this, once we get the single mother's allowance in 73, the numbers drop off. And whether social stigma and everything aside, when women can maybe afford to have an option, it does. These institutions, now it's also the year we joined the EEC, so, but...
It's also, I think, I really think the biggest social change was in 1967.
The education.
Because there was such a class distinction with the small family looking down on the cultural class. This was all back since famine times, and as you say, the oldest lad, the families, the priesthood and all that. So really, I think that changed. And then the free education for the 3rd level.
It's huge.
But everyone was, up to that, you could say, the doctor's son had privilege where no one access. For now, the poorest family today can access a 2nd level and 3rd level education. So we've such equal opportunity today, regardless of the existing problems we consider we have.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't have gone to university by any means.
Where educated, the religion, people are completely held down by those old mores, repressed Catholicism, etc. All the things are kicking in,
Yeah, down the back, sorry.
Are there any records of children with special needs?
There are, yes. That is another, I actually have one of my PhD students, David Kilgannon, is doing a history of disability in Ireland, or particularly intellectual disability from 1945, and he has gotten access to lots of different records, not just homes, but actually people caring within the home when they brought in the allowance. I won't speak for his research, are you interested? There were, when State Saphira came out in 1999, the programme, obviously the second part was about abuse of children in Losha, in Carver School for the Deaf. So David has followed that and also expanded out the research in this area. So it'll actually be really important that he did this, because we need just this kind of rounded discussion, because in the 1950s, and like my partner is a psychiatric nurse, and he, you know, we have discussions about psychiatric hospitals and things, but when in the 50s, they actually do bring in an allowance for within the home. It's small, but it's unusual. And then it kind of moves back to the institution again. And then they kind of say they want to move out to the community, but they don't set up the services. So most of what David is finding is parents and family groups are the ones providing the services. It's not the state. They're forcing the state by setting up their own community organisations. They're the ones driving. And if we look at why special needs teachers are in schools today, that's because parents took a case. Or if we look at why corporal punishment is abolished in schools, there was a letter writing campaign from the 1950s in Dublin where parents wrote to the Evening Herald hundreds of letters about the abuse in schools that their kids, and they did this like for 30 years. Parents are a big part of, there's a whole other history of parents and their advocacy and activism, which is interesting, I think. Yeah. Yeah, will I go to someone else? Or,
yeah. Go back to politics.
In the politics.
Yeah, in the national school system, how conscious were the British in using the national school system in making Irish people happy, English children, literally in changing their brains? Because I remember as a kid and myself, we used to get these leftover magazines.
Yes, they're the,
You know, not even, whenever there was this rovers or something,
yeah.
there was all these happy British soldiers shooting Jerry's coming over the hill. You know, looking enough, I was, I knew enough not to believe them. But, so I'm just saying, was that written down, was that consciously done?
Well, it's not like it is consciously done, yeah. Kieran O'Neill has done a lot of work on this, especially in private Catholic schools actually, to kind of import those colonial ideas more so than British. So more about the empire and how great the empire was. But even the fact obviously that the hedge schools had to exist, that it was illegal at that point to receive that Catholic education. And then when we do get into the curriculum from the end of the 19th century, you also are starting to have the influence of, you know, the Gaelic League and other groups. So it's starting to, there's not as many years, but like we're finishing up a book at the moment on literacy in 19th century Ireland. It's an edited collection, and most of the chapters have to deal with bilingualism, the fact that Irish is seen as peasant language, no opportunities, and also the fact that there's a difference in how literate people are. Some people could read a bit, write a bit, some people couldn't write at all, could read, and just the effect that the famine has on the language and how many Irish speakers we lose. So that's the biggest impact, I suppose. What you're talking about with the cultural stuff, that's there, but probably more, I would think that's more in like the middle class schools than in, you know, the everyday schools. I don't know what they have seen sight of the magazines, you know, but definitely the kind of private Catholic schools, it is there until they make up their own ones.
But would it not be true that
this girl and the,
oh, I beg your pardon.
Oh yeah, no, just I'm just noticing this.
Just a quick question about boarding out.
Yeah.
Is there much research in that area?
The short answer is no, there's not a lot. Sean Lucy has done a book in the county homes and a bit on boarding out. I have a bit in my book. Virginia Crossman has done like her work on the poor law. Everyone has a bit on boarding out. One of my students is doing a history of foster care in Ireland. She's going back as far as 1920, so she will be addressing it. But there does need to be a study of boarding out in the 19th century, just to from 1862 when it's introduced.
But they were very slow to take, the workhouse guardians didn't.
Oh, they never embraced boarding out.
To send them back out to poor families, and they really made it difficult.
They never embraced boarding out. In the 19th century, they don't embrace it because lots of the board of guardians are suspicious of poor Catholic families. That with some of it is warranted. Some people are taking in a child to work, so they want their payment. You know, they'll take the clothes off their back and have them work.
Say a grandmother is having to put her grandchildren into the workhouse and look for them back because she can't afford to keep them without the allowance.
The workhouse, you can actually get your children back.
Yeah.
You don't sign over.
No, but this was she put them in, and I just thought.
Oh yeah, because she had to work, so she couldn't afford to look at, or she needed the payment for them.
She said if I get the payment, I'll take them back out.
Yeah.
And her grandchildren. So,
yeah. So
it was up for discussion.
It's like any other system. One of the reasons I think they don't do boarding out as much is it's more difficult to inspect. If you have to cycle to that many homes to check on that many children, because that's your mode of transport for the most part, then it's more difficult than going to an institution and checking on them, do you know? And also some people are taking them in for the money, so they're not incorrect. But the work, like I looked at Galway and I saw a real diverse, so in the reports, which are very honest, you go from, and like I've interviewed a few gentlemen who were hired out in Donegal in the 30s and 40s, and like one gentleman, he did 4 seasons, so 2 years, you know, 6 months, and one of them was really good, and up until the day he died at 90, he stayed in touch with that family. One of them, he slept with the pigs and was never allowed to eat with them, didn't really go to school. That's the diversity of experience, I guess, in that.
Was it from the county homes they came down in the 30s and the 40s?
For boarded out. So, some of it, the industrial schools actually boarded out up until the 1940s. They kind of stopped in the 1940s because the numbers were going down in the schools. So they kind of stopped the boarding out. With the hiring out, that's families, obviously. You know, think of Pat the Cope, his biography, or any of the biographies of the hiring out system. That's families. And that's girls and boys from the age of 10 to 12 doing their, going up to Strabane or wherever it is to the fair, and the transaction being sold for their 6 months of work, I suppose. Yeah.
No, I think it was sort of covered, but I was going to ask you, so many people up to free education never went to secondary school.
Yeah.
Now, it probably improved as you got into the 60s, but going back into the 20s, 30s and 40s, how much were adolescents really, how much were they exploited? Is there any statistics out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of work now. There's a new book out on youth culture in the 50s and a new book out on youth in the 60s, which are quite good. No one, like I'm really interested in the 20s and 30s as well. And are they exploited? This is about your perspective. If people are working, sometimes I'm like people are working. So if at 30, it goes back to the question at the start. What age does childhood start? There's a really good, Harry Hendrick has it in the book, it's a 9-year-old girl and she's selling matches in London, and someone comes up to her and says, what are you doing? You shouldn't be working. And she's like, I'm doing my job. To her, she is working. At that time, that's her job. You know, if you were, I think sometimes with compulsory education, it was really quick, like all of a sudden, go to school till you're 12, when that wasn't the culture. So the 20s and 30s, to go to school, and if you look at the debates in the Dáil on raising the age to 14, someone suggested 16. And it is mostly the rural TDs that are like, what? We can't, 16 is being married with children, or, you know, they were like, this is, and what did you think of yourself in 1928, if you were 13, you probably thought you were pretty much adult. You know, you knew you didn't have the full, independence, but you might be making a bit of a wage, and you were probably giving all of it up at home. But I think that, you know, how we understand adolescence, about your class, I guess.
I grew up in a farm, and we were working.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as we could do jobs, we had jobs to do.
Yeah.
So what is work? What I was asking, like, on the extreme side, was there a lot of exploitation?
Well, like, my first job, I was 13. I don't think my mum knew it was illegal for me to wash dishes at 13, but I did my 15, 20 hours a week, whatever I was doing in the local restaurant. I know culturally now that's seen as...
It's exploitation.
Yeah. Whereas, I think the line between children and work, and even the term child labour is very loaded in my mind. But, yeah.
Can I just ask you, the countries that are doing all those reports, are they all English speaking?
Go through my there's some stuff going on now in Chile and in Argentina. It's not done yet, so no, they're not all English speaking. No.
Or they're not all where Irish missionaries went or anything either, no?
A lot of them are. Sorry. I don't know what you're going to say, but they went lots of places.
I saw their introduction of children's allowance. Would you just say what led up to it and the bottom?
Oh, sure, yeah. The children's allowance is really interesting. Do you know a bit about it? Because they're really good questions, so I'm guessing you're... So it was actually debates about how larger families, obviously there was poverty in large families, so they said in the UK, the Beveridge Report in 1942 said we'll have a family allowance. Now that did not sit well, that did seem too socialist, because the Beveridge Report is quite socialist. So they said, look, we'll have a children's allowance, and it will be the third child onwards. So you won't get the allowance for the first two children. You won't give it to the mother, you'll give it to the father. We've lots of nodding here. That didn't always go down well, but you could have the option 10 years later of signing it over so that the mother could collect it. But initially, and if you look at the debates, the big discussion is, if you cannot make the father feel less like the breadwinner. If you give this to the mother, she has this independence. If you give it for every child, it might be too much money. Would it actually deter larger families? So it's very interesting, the debates in Ireland, because it's not actually till the 1974, isn't it, that women can actually collect it. Before that it can be signed over. But it's a very interesting one. The debates are fascinating. If you can read them online.
And when the debates were all carried on by men, of course.
And when did it come in?
In 1944. So the Beveridge Report is 1942. The Beveridge Report, which sets up the NHS and the welfare system in Britain. And they're not unaware of the Beveridge Report here. Like, Hitler had a copy of it in his bunker. So everyone knew about the Beveridge Report. So they're kind of looking at the Beveridge Report going, well, we have to, you know, and then we move on and we get the Mother and Child Scheme in 1951, which is a whole other...
When did the widow's pension?
35. And it's the only single mother that gets a pension. Because unmarried mothers don't get one, deserted wives don't get one. Widows got the pension. So there's a differentiation between...
They were respected.
They were respectable. We can't end on that.